Good day, I'm Lisa Seymour. I'm talking today about BPMS adoption and use. The case study is in South African financial services. This is for the BPMS conference, which it's during COVID, so we have to record these and we're all under lockdown. So the talk today, I'm going to first unpack my research question. We're going to talk about adoption, describe the case, the data sources, what we found, conclude, and leave discussions for the Q&A. I've got a diagram here which I think is quite useful. What it shows is when you do adopt technologies like BPM and SOA, you don't do that in isolation. It needs to be governed by an enterprise architecture. You need the relevant operational capabilities and the strategy to drive it. But organizations don't always know this. So many companies, in fact, struggle with SOA and BPM. There have been studies saying that haven't always unpacked why. And there has been a call from the BPM community to try and understand what are the issues that organizations are facing when they use the relevant technologies or as part of just managing their business processes. And that there really isn't a lot of studies that go into organizations and do empirical work. So this is our research question. How do factors affect successful adoption and use of a BPMS? And the case is a South African financial services organization. So when one adopts a technology, it's not, this is an example, this is a paper by Kalle which looks at technology being part of a socio-technical system. That's what information systems researchers is that socio-technical combination. And notices that when you use a technology, it's used by people, actors. They do certain tasks and they form part of an organizational structure. These are all in balance until a critical incident happens, such as you change a technology or, in other words, adopt a new technology. And then the socio-technical system becomes out of balance and has to be addressed. Unfortunately, a lot of studies, when one looks at adoption, the default study is looking at something like technology acceptance model or TAM, which says, okay, adopting a technology, it's all about how useful and user-friendly it is. But this is not really the case with a BPMS. This is not the issue that the organizations are facing. So there has been a call for a more holistic way of understanding what are the issues when these organizations adopt technology. So Stephen Alter has come up with what he calls a systems theory of IT innovation, adoption, and adaptation. He also calls it the work systems framework. Here's the diagram of it. What he says is that technology doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of an information system or work system, which has four parts: the people, the information or data, the technology, and the processes and activity. And that information system or work system exists. It's supported by infrastructure, it has an environment, and it has strategy, and the work system, creates products and services for customers. And to really understand a technology, you need to look at it holistically in this whole work system. In other words, he's arguing it's the work system that is adopted, not the technology. One can actually take Stephen Alter's work systems framework and map it to Michael Roseman's BPM core elements model, and there's a fairly good match, which shows that although the core BPM elements are something that are elements that need to be considered when you manage your processes, in fact, it's very similar to how you deal with an entire work system. In other words, technology adoption and implementing a management practice rely on the same kind of factors. Let's introduce this case. It's a large financial services company. It's been going for a long time. It's got a large legacy estate and ERP systems sitting at the bottom. There are in the investment and insurance space. They've got a BPM team that they are within IT that supports their BPMS and their SOA stack. They've got a lot of SOA developers. They've got a lot of business units and different departments that have their own strategies and feel a little bit autonomous. So they implemented their BPMS in about 2014, and they've been using it, but they've been noticing that in fact they haven't been agile, and whereas that was the promise, was agility. They wanted to model their business process. That's what they're doing. They're automating processes across different applications and managing workflow across different units and applications. So these were our data sources, 8 interviews, 3 documents from architects to developers within the organization. And these were the themes. So these themes all correlate to the Roseman BPM model, and we found themes popping up under those categories. So under strategic alignment, we noticed immediately that there were issues with the strategy. 3 themes came through. So firstly, they had a strategy where their legacy systems, they wouldn't touch them. They'd try not to change them at all, but they would keep their life until their license expired. And this was creating a big problem for the BPM team. There wasn't a central BPM strategy. So as far as they were concerned, this was an IT intervention. They'd had the relevant IT staff. They didn't have a center of excellence. So already there's a problem with it. No holistic BPM strategic vision. And then they noticed a problem because of this, that as an organization, they would have strategic initiatives that would get budget. There were all these projects running, and something like BPM, which is seen as business as usual, wouldn't get the priority. It would always be seen as not as important as some project that was going live. There were quite a few themes under governance and culture. It's a large financial services industry, so they were resistant to change. They were fairly autonomous. So they didn't see why things should change. They weren't really supportive of BPM. There was a problem with the governance in terms of the standardization decisions made by management. So they were fairly okay with different sections of the organization wanting niche processes. So there was no real drive to standardize. So every process would be niche. I suppose misalignment between business and IT. So the IT had come at this from an IT perspective and not necessarily a process perspective. So they were finding this whole big business process perspective a challenge. And there was this issue with business as usual. There wasn't a lot of money for business as usual, whereas the big projects that were rolling out were getting all the attention. A huge amount of issues in the IT front. So we know BPM and SOA is challenging. And these were some of the things that came up. The legacy systems, because of them being fairly old, they were tightly coupled with point-to-point integration. That was problematic. They would have issues with data, and because they couldn't change the legacy applications, they couldn't roll out any overall validations to their data across all their applications. External applications, they had being risk averse. They would have major security concerns. Every time an external application changed, they would have to change things. So what they were finding was that with their BPM, and because of the nature of their organization and their technology, they were doing a huge amount of analysis, testing, governance. Every time a process changed, there was a massive amount that needed to be done. In fact, they were not feeling agile at all. In terms of the people, they also had issues with resources. So developers didn't want to do BPM. They didn't think it was sexy, sort of rather they would much rather be programming. They were also struggling to find computing people who were techies, yes, but they were not able to find people who are technically strong and business strong. That was seen as a big challenge. The other problem is that they needed to, because they were integrating with BPM, you're integrating multiple applications, you'd need a team of people and you'd need to get hold of developers dealing with the different applications you're integrating with. And they would be sitting on strategic projects, which meant it was very hard getting time from the people. And this is our final theme, methods. So what they were noticing was that they had some governance. You need governance with BPM and SOA. So you have your enterprise architects. You need sign-off, documentation, and they found this lengthy initiation process was just slowing down everything, and meaning they were not agile. So what was also happening is the developers would then bypass the controls that the architects were putting in place and developing just niche, not standardizing, not reusing. And this was driven by the developers and the project managers, and of course business. So they would work together, and that was creating a problem. So we've put this together into a model which shows that in reality, the lack of agility that they were experiencing and what they would term successful BPM adoption was being influenced by their methods, their people, and their IT. And a lot of this is, in fact, being driven by their governance and culture, which was in turn driven by lack of strategic alignment. So this is the model we came up with. And if you consider that model, we then said, well, if you are to get this right, I suppose what organizations really need to understand is when you are using something like BPM, it's not just software where you can sort of install with the help of an IT department, use BPM and SOA. You do need to look at appropriate resourcing and methods. You need to consider your IT decisions, and this critically is driven from your strategy, your governance, and your culture. And unless you're going to be dealing with those, it's just going to be an uphill battle, and you won't really achieve the agility that you set out to achieve. So in conclusion, that's what we found. I think it was useful getting the voice of the people in the organizations using BPM. You can understand why there are concerns with BPM. It's become less popular, and I think it is because it's a hard thing to do. Process has always been a hard thing to do. I think it reminds us of in this before Y2K when BPR was big. I was on some BPR projects, and then suddenly that all died because everyone said it's much easier to just go out and buy an ERP. And it seems like that's what's happening now. People aren't wanting to invest in process. They'd much rather, just buy, let's rather get a technology. It's much easier than having to do the hard things like culture and strategy, and which is hard for organizations. Now they'd much rather sort of do some process mining or get a nice tool. Okay, I hope you found this talk interesting and hope there'll be some discussion. Thank you.